silo is a concrete cylinder driven 144 levels into the ground, holding somewhere around 10,000 people, sealed against the world above, and the only thing connecting one floor to the next is a single spiral staircase, because there are no lifts in it anywhere. It is usually discussed as a story: who is hiding what, how it all ends, and which of them can be trusted. It is discussed far less often as the thing it actually is, which is a working industrial plant obliged to manufacture its own electricity, water, air, light, and food around the clock, with no suppliers and no outside repair crews of any kind. So today we are going to take it apart system by system and in order. The shell and the floor slabs, generation and distribution, cooling, fuel and exhaust, water and pumps, ventilation, light and farming, waste, materials, and transport. We will look at what machinery is actually down there, how those machines depend on one another, and what in that chain gives out first. Everything that follows comes from Hugh Howey's books and from nothing else. There will be no plot and no characters here, only hardware, though some of these systems are only explained by the third book, and it seems fairer to say so now. Begin with the thing all of it is poured into. The silo is a concrete cylinder divided into 144 numbered levels, beneath which the structure carries on without numbers, and below that, the mines begin. The thickness of the outer wall is measured in the books from the inside, and it is measured in the one moment when somebody tries to cut through it. It comes to 5 or 6 feet of concrete, and the reinforcement is not laid in a single row, because the first course of rebar is exposed almost at once. Another 2 feet in the torch finds a second, and the wall turns out to be thicker than anyone had allowed for. The floor slabs between levels are a separate matter, and an unpleasant one. Heavy layers of concrete are built in between the floors so that they can be cut loose remotely and sent down one after another like dominoes, crushing everything caught in between. And the text describes those layers as stacks 30 feet thick. The demolition system is fitted into the building alongside the ventilation and drawn into the plans from the very beginning. The famous spiral staircase, meanwhile, is only the trunk rather than the whole architecture. Behind the gates of the machine department, the stairs are square, turning at right angles, and the same square steps turn up at the bazaar, so the spiral is simply the method of joining levels together. While inside those levels, everything is built in the ordinary way. A level is also not always one story. Beneath the farms, there are half-levels with low ceilings, where the pipework hangs openly overhead and rattles every time the pumps start. So the useful height has been given to equipment rather than to people. The internal partitions, meanwhile, are laid up in cinder block, curved to the radius of the cylinder, which means the shell alone is load-bearing and everything inside it is infill. And there is one line about the construction that explains all of the logistics that follow. It becomes clear at the design stage that supplies could never be carried in up the staircase, which means the floors were stocked before the prefabricated sections were craned down and capped. The silo was filled once, and it has been living off what was put into it ever since. Everything else in the silo begins in the machine hall, behind the gates of level 140. The main unit there is a diesel generator the size of an apartment, started by a separate small electric motor that turns the larger machine over. Between the generator and the dynamo runs a steel shaft as thick as a man's waist, and this is the place the book describes as where the power of combusting fuel is transformed into the spark of electricity. Alignment on that shaft is held to within 1/1000th of an inch, and it is achieved with a homemade rig of mirrors and narrow slits that bounces a beam of light across the room. Included deep the main unit, the power plant holds a smaller backup generator, a control room behind double glazing with knobs and dials, a rail beyond which the mechanics gather during work, and heavy rubber floor mounts drawn down with bolts and lock nuts. The cylinder shafts are polished from inside the machine itself, which only an apprentice can crawl into because a grown adult simply does not fit. The most interesting thing here is not the construction, but the duty cycle, which is mentioned in passing and easy to walk straight past. The machine runs continuously. It has never once been fully shut down within living memory, and only a single emergency self-shutdown is remembered from a generation earlier. For the people who live at the bottom, the hum of the generator is described as constant and close, like their own heartbeat, and the noise in the hall itself is such that everyone puts on ear protection when work is underway. From which follows what routine maintenance looks like in a place like this. It is called a power holiday, and it means a silo-wide brownout lasting several days, during which everything is carried on the backup generator, trade shuts down, the staircase empties, and the light along the whole shaft visibly shimmers. Servicing one machine means dimming an entire world, and a holiday like that is announced as an occasion requiring a suitable pretext. The current that shaft produces is shared out very unevenly, and the figures here are known precisely. IT occupies 3 floors out of 144 and consumes more than a quarter of all the power the silo generates. That proportion is stated outright in the book, together with an offer to work the arithmetic through out loud. What matters is that the arrangement is fixed by a document rather than by habit. The severe power restrictions in force on every other level exist largely because of the exemptions IT holds, and those exemptions are written into specific clauses of the pact, which are duly pointed out whenever the question comes up. The Q for a kilowatt in this world carries the force of constitutional law, and the Q looks like this. The servers stand ahead of the grow lights, and they stand there permanently and lawfully rather than now and then. It is worth seeing how that falls across the map. The generator sits behind the gates of level 140. IT occupies levels 33 to 35, and the farms are scattered across all 3/3 of the silo: 17, 30, 56, 62, 90, 126, and the 130s. So roughly 100 floors of cable lie between the source of the power and the people using it. One more thing is said about those restrictions, said in passing and worth catching. It was never widely publicized, but the severe limits on the other levels existed mainly because of the exemptions IT held. And here it turns out that the silo does not have only one source of power. Under the floor grating at the foot of the server room ladder runs a bundle of cabling. The camera feeds travel along it, and they leave through a sealed port set where the outer wall of the silo ought to be. Lying beside them in that same bundle are thick cables identified as resembling the main feeds from the 2 generators in the machine department, and running with those are 2 copper pipes. What all of that means is stated openly and without hedging. In the neighboring emptied silo, that level is still live. The whole of 34 has full power, with no generator running anywhere in the building, and the servers over there are still humming. A dead building, a stopped machine, and one entire level under full power. This is a design decision rather than somebody's emergency patch, because it appears on the drawings. On the schematic of that neighboring silo, you can see thick branches of lines running from the exterior walls and off the edges of the paper, labeled in ordinary engineering marks. And among them, the lines carrying the symbol for electricity are legible. The explanation offered there is just as plain. We do not get our own power anymore, we borrow it from others, and it all happens automatically. Now the business with the farms falls into place, and it is a detail that gets retold indirectly more often than not. The survivors of that neighboring silo tapped into this external feed and ran cables down from it to power pumps and the grow lights of the lower farms, and they strung that wiring in the early days of the collapse many years ago. The lamps down there still obey their timers. The greenery grows without a single person tending it, and the ripe smell of it carries several landings away. This is not the standard way the farms are fed. It is people who found the one socket still working and ran an extension cord 100 floors. As to why an external feed exists at all, the book gives no answer and offers 2 possibilities instead, and both are worth holding as possibilities. Either the builders do not trust the silo to keep itself running unsupervised, or the servers simply require more current than the place can generate on its own. That leaves the two copper pipes in the same bundle, and they turn out to be a supply line running to the gas bottles of the airlock, laid separately from the standard supply system. Of that standard system, it is finally said that it appears to do nothing whatsoever. So an umbilical passes through the concrete wall into the silo, carrying electricity, video, and gas. It is drawn on the plans, it works automatically, and it goes on working when there is nobody left inside. The generator feeds the people, and the second feed keeps the watching alive. IT carries one more dependency that is almost never brought up, although it is named in the text in a single line. The servers have their full allocation of power, but their cooling comes ducted from the machine department, and if the temperature climbs any further, they will have to ramp down, which they have never had to do. Work through what follows from that. The servers stand on level 34, and the cold reaches them from level 140, which means a duct run of more than 100 floors working from the bottom upward. The most protected and most privileged department in the silo depends physically on a machine maintained by people it keeps behind a gate that inspects papers. Stopping the generator does not black the servers out, it overheats them, and those are two very different failures. The same system has its reverse side, because the heat has to be put somewhere, and heat exchangers leak in time. A leaking heat exchanger comes up as an ordinary breakdown calling for heat tape, and the tape cannot be had, because the backing material for it is all spoken for and going upstairs to those same servers. Cooling, scarcity, and priority turn out to be tied into one knot with no single thread that can be pulled out of it. The fuel for the generator is extracted directly beneath the building. On level 142, 2 floors below the gates, stands an oil rig, and it is described through the eyes of someone seeing such a machine for the first time in their life. A steel arm the size of several people end to end, moving up and down, driving a piston through the concrete floor, with the air around it smelling of something chemical and something rotten. It works without stopping, and in later scenes it goes on nodding its head through the general chaos as though it knew how sad the ways of the world are. The shallow reserves have been worked out by the period described, so the drilling now goes past 10,000 feet, and the new oil is found down there. It is dangerous work, and there is a case on record. The rig once struck a pocket of methane, and 8 levels had to be evacuated until the air handlers made it safe to return. 8 floors of housing emptied because of gas from the bore. The oil is also doing 2 jobs at once, and the second is easy to miss. Besides fueling the generator, it serves as feedstock. There is a plastics factory on level 38, and the whole of hydroponics is built on white plastic pipe, so the pipes the food grows in are made of the same thing that turns the generator that lights the lamps above that food, which leaves the exhaust, and it is the most awkward part of the whole design. The generator has a massive exhaust system, and one scene describes the outpouring of noxious fumes from that apartment-sized machine being rerouted to the floors of the 30s high above, from which it follows that the products of combustion are vented inside the cylinder as a matter of course, and that the route they take can be changed, so that the heating and the weapon here are the same pipe. The silo stands below the water table, and that single fact shapes its entire water system. There are 3 treatment plants, and they sit at 3 different heights. The upper one on level 32, a small plant together with the main pump control room on 38, and the lower one, which passers-by can only call pungent, beneath the large farm in the 130s. This is not redundancy, because water cannot be lifted from the very bottom to the very top by a single pump, so the plants work in stages the way they would on any real water main. Besides the 3 plants, the silo holds a cistern that is kept topped up and, when necessary, fed by diverting from the hydroponics supply, which means the drinking reserve and the irrigation sit on one circuit and compete with each other. Ordinary mechanical work down there looks like stripping a failed pump while being sprayed by its leaking neighbor. And respooling motor windings counts as a speciality of its own, described as unwrapping a mile of wire and laying it back in place. Water comes up from below constantly, and that is the background condition rather than an emergency. A leak in the basement subwall sits in the same list of routine failures as a methane strike. The cement at the pit basin rots and gets patched, and the sump basins are described as being at the very bottom of the silo. The wording in the book is entirely matter of fact. Groundwater is forever seeping in because they live below the water table, and without power to the pumps, the water will naturally make its way in and rise. So the only thing keeping the silo from flooding is a set of working pumps, and those pumps run off the same shaft as everything else. On the subject of air, there are exactly 3 reliable things in the books, and they are worth laying out in order, because together they add up to less than people assume. The first thing known for certain is that the silo has a service called the air handlers, and the only work of theirs shown anywhere in the text amounts to clearing up accidents. When the rig on the lower levels struck that pocket of methane, 8 levels stood empty until the air handlers had made the air down there breathable again. The second, and this is where the blank begins, how ordinary everyday air is maintained is never described anywhere, and across all 3 volumes there is not one scene involving regeneration, filters, or scrubbers. There is a single indirect mention, in which the gas supply to the airlock is said to draw from deep within the earth, in the same way the air handlers work. Which is to say that inside the silo, it is believed that the ventilation takes something out of the rock. And the third, that line turns out to be the only one it was ever possible to check, and it does not survive the check. The gas reaching the airlock bottles arrives from outside along 2 copper pipes by way of the same bundle discussed in the section on the second feed, and of the internal supply system, it is said that it appears to do nothing whatsoever. The airlock itself, meanwhile, works properly and is described in detail. The argon chambers hiss as they flood the room with inert gas, displacing the ordinary air, and within a minute, the pressure is enough to crinkle the suit tight around the joints of whoever is standing in it. The conclusion for this section is a simple one. What is known about the silo's ventilation is that it can deal with the poisoning of 8 whole levels, and that its work gets described in terms of drawing air out of the ground. Where the air that 10,000 people actually breathe comes from is not stated in the books. Food in the silo is grown 2 different ways, and both of them are engineering structures before they are anything else. The hydroponic tunnel winds through 2 levels at once, curving all the way out to the concrete walls, and inside it runs a lattice of white plastic pipe with twine strung everywhere for the vines to hold on to, while the sound of dripping water carries under the low ceiling the whole time. The best description of how a farm actually works, though, comes from underneath it rather than from the farm itself, out of those low half levels below. The pipes there hang visible and rattle angrily each time the pumps kick on and push nutrients out toward distant and thirsty roots, and water drips from the ceiling into buckets and pots. A farm in the silo is, first of all, a pumping station with vegetables growing on top of it. Alongside hydroponics, there are genuine dirt farms on levels 8, 31, and 126. And real soil here is the second half of a cycle rather than an antique. The light above the beds comes out of that same contested kilowatt, and in the queue for it, the lamps stand behind the servers. The soil cycle is closed with animals and with the dead, and the book says so without any circumlocution. Level 90 carries the smell of fertilizer, and the pigs and other animals kept there are described as producing this useful waste, which explains what they are for. Livestock turns the inedible part of a plant into fertilizer, and the meat follows from that, rather than the other way round. The dead, meanwhile, are lowered into the deep soil of the upper dirt farm, where the body will decompose and feed the roots, and the cotton that clothing is later knitted from is traced in the text directly back to those laid to rest in that ground. From which follows a conclusion the book states exactly once, and almost nobody notices. If a body is fertilizer, then a cleaning is the permanent removal of matter from the circuit. And the text walks up to that thought itself, with its line about a person wasting away in plain sight, rather than feeding the roots. Everything thrown away in the silo goes back into circulation, and it has an address. Sanitation sits on level 26, and it is mentioned in passing, in a list of the things somebody walks past on the way up, while the sacks of rubbish are carried downstairs by porters to the recycling center. Thrift here works as physics, and the small details show it best. Paper is reused without being pulped, and people simply write on the back of a sheet that has already been used. A plastic tie is kept for next time by teasing the clasp loose rather than cutting it, and apprentices are taught that separately. The whole local order, though, is best described by the story of one light bulb. A bulb in an office began to flicker. 2 different technicians from electrical came to inspect it in turn, and both deemed it too operational to replace. Getting it changed took a personal appeal to the head of supply, who carried the replacement up the stairs herself and asked in passing why the obvious thing had not been done, which is what everybody else does: break the bulb the rest of the way. Manufacturing of spare parts is concentrated in supply on level 110, and it is arranged as a warehouse and a factory at the same time. A long, low counter for issuing parts, behind it parallel aisles of shelving running off into the gloom, and behind those, a workshop humming and clanking with machinery where freshly made bolts and nuts are sorted into bins. The metal for all of it comes from a small mine beneath the lowest levels, and the wording in the book is worth reading slowly. The mine supplemented the silo's stockpile of ores. That is the word chosen, and what it means is that an original stockpile exists somewhere, and that mining only slows the rate at which it drains away. That leaves the system people think of last, even though every other one depends on it. There are no lifts in the silo, the staircase is the only transport artery, and the entire freight traffic of this world moves on human backs. The porter network did not form by itself either, because it is designed. There are 3 way stations, on level 10, on level 74, and on level 120, which is one for each third of the silo, and each of them roughly at the middle of its own 48 floors. The network has a memory of its own as well, since a massive ledger fashioned out of a fortune in paper is kept under lock and key in central dispatch, where certain deliveries are recorded by hand, and they are recorded that way deliberately so the information cannot slip off into the wires. The same thing explains the logic of the whole vertical. Heavy and dirty work sits at the bottom, light work at the top, and the farms and water plants are smeared across all 3/3, which happens for reasons of physics rather than convenience, because carrying food and water the length of the shaft is not possible. The same principle explains why the supplies were brought in before the roof went on. A building nothing can be lifted into has to be filled once, and filled in advance. Now the chain can be put together in a single sentence. Oil from the bore feeds the generator turns the shaft gives current to the pumps, the ventilation, the cooling for the servers and the lamps above the beds. The lamps produce the food. The pipes beneath those beds are made from the same oil, and the pumps hold the water down through all of it. Take out any one link and the rest come to a stop. And the main thing about this machine remains to be said, which is that it has no documentation. Knowledge here passes through apprentices who spend years walking behind a master, and no other way of transmitting a skill exists in a world where a clean sheet of paper costs half a day's wages. One object proves the point. The main generator of the silo has exactly one operating manual, a thick sheaf of pages held by brass fasteners and titled by hand, and inside it are diagrams, dial settings in every conceivable order, valve positions and electrical schematics sketched in sharp lead. One mechanic assembled it piece by piece, working the control room out over a period of years. The paper, as the rules of the place require, is recycled without being pulped, so the writing went on the back, and printed on the front is the text of a play. Later, that sheaf is filed away on a shelf in the archive, among notes to future silo leaders, in case things in the down deep should go from bad to worse. We have taken the silo apart as a machine, and we have deliberately walked around the question that falls out of doing so. How long can any of this keep working, when the spare parts cannot be manufactured again? Next time we are going to stop on level 110 and stay there, because supply is not a warehouse. It is the only department that knows how much time is left, and somebody there once sat down and did the arithmetic. Thanks for coming all the way down with me.